Today is May Day across the entire world. This day is marked by red flags and raised fists and chants for absolute equality. From the streets of Moscow to Havana, from Beijing to Berlin, impoverished masses have again and again turned to one promise: that equality can be engineered through a socialist revolution. But why was this idea never embraced by the impoverished Afrikaners, even when it first became propagated in this country? Why, when following the Anglo-Boer War, our people were reduced to absolute poverty, stripped of land and wealth and all political power, did they not embrace communism in the same way so many other nations did early in the 20th century, and so many nations, or the majority of nations, that do today still in South Africa, which is also the reason why we celebrate May Day today. Stay tuned, because today we are going to uncover a forgotten chapter of the Afrikaner and what it tells us about the culture, identity and the choices our nation and other nations in South Africa made when everything is taken from them. With their farms destroyed by the scorched earth policy of the British and no food on the tables, our ancestors returned home after the Boer War from battlefields and concentration camps to burnt down farms where their implements were destroyed and all of their livestock slaughtered and even their fields burnt down. And so, for the first few decades of the 20th century, the Afrikaner people were both impoverished and humiliated. And yet, in less than half a century, that same people would rise again from nothing to build one of the most economically developed societies in the Southern Hemisphere. And they did so precisely by rejecting the path that the Russians, the Chinese, and so many other desperate poor nations took at the same time. During the devastating Anglo-Boer War, the British Empire employed over 500,000 troops against roughly 60,000 to 120,000 Boer fighters. But more devastating than any battlefield losses was the policy of scorched earth. Farms were burnt down, livestock were slaughtered or killed, entire agricultural systems were collapsed. The agriculture-based economy of the Boer republics was brought to a complete halt. Imagine returning after 3 years of fighting to find your farm just completely gone, as it was before any development took place there. Your cattle all dead, your fields burned to ashes, no harvest, no income, no future. That was the reality of our ancestors just over 100 years ago. Thousands of completely impoverished Afrikaners, unable to survive on ruined farms and consequently moved into cities like Johannesburg, where they entered into a very new, unfamiliar world, working for wealthy British and Jewish people in the mines and the factories and the industries. According to a famous report by the New York-based Carnegie Commission report published roughly 30 years after the Boer War ended, more than 250,000 Afrikaners, or just over 25% of the total population, was still living in extreme poverty 30 years later. This is exactly the kind of condition in which communism historically took root. In Russia, the devastation of World War I contributed to fertile soil for the Russian Revolution under Vladimir Lenin. In China, the rural desperation fed to the rise of the Communist Party under Mao Zedong. And in many parts of Europe and South America, early 20th century economic collapses likewise birthed powerful socialist and communist movements which turned into governments. So why not among the Afrikaners who were also just as poor or even much poorer? You see, despite minor flirtations with communism among fringe groups in the 1920s, Afrikaners, unlike so many other peoples or nations, always rejected socialism and consistently resisted the pull of revolutionary ideology, even at moments when it may have seemed materially attractive or politically expedient. Today I would like to point to at least 4 reasons why. Firstly, the Afrikaner cultural identity has always been deeply rooted in the Christian faith, and particularly through institutions such as the Dutch Reformed Church, which played a central role in shaping our moral outlook and communal life. Of course, the Afrikaner culture was most heavily influenced by Calvinism, which is also the particular theology that Max Weber wrote about when he wrote about the so-called Protestant work ethic. Unlike many revolutionary movements of the early 20th century, which were driven by this materialist philosophies and often explicitly hostile to their religions or to Christianity in particular, Afrikaners interpreted their suffering through this Calvinist theological lens, one that emphasized calling, endurance, providence, and ultimately own accountability before God. In this framework of the culture of the Afrikaner, poverty was not primarily understood as the result of any form of oppression demanding violent upheaval, but as a condition to be met with repentance, moral renewal, and disciplined reconstruction of the people. The Afrikaners' response to the injustices of the Boer War and the oppression of their freedoms was therefore never a revolution, but to take responsibility for themselves. Secondly, where communist movements typically emphasized this class conflict as the engine of change, Afrikaners responded to poverty by building and strengthening community-based structures that could provide practical upliftment without social fragmentation. Churches, cultural organizations, cooperatives, and various forms of mutual aid stepped into the gap where the state proved insufficient during the time. This created a dense network of support rooted in shared identity and purpose to uplift the Afrikaner people. Under political leaders such as Prime Ministers J.B.M. Hertzog and later D.F. Malan, this communal impulse was further reinforced through the policies of the government aimed at uplifting the poor Afrikaner masses via structured economic development rather than any form of revolutionary or socialist redistribution. The emphasis always remained on building, organizing, and advancing within the existing framework rather than tearing it down, as we see, which is the fundamental difference with what we see with the ANC and their view of the world. Thirdly, communism tends to gain traction in environments where individuals feel they have nothing left to lose. Yet, even in conditions of severe poverty, Afrikaners maintained a strong attachment to the land of their fathers, to their families, and to their heritage here in South Africa. The ideals of private property ownership were something they held sacred. And if anything, the economic devastation at the start of the 20th century with the Anglo-Boer War and later the second punch that came with the Great Depression worldwide, the Afrikaners' desire to recover and secure themselves also intensified. And so instead of seeking to abolish private ownership, the prevailing aspiration of the Afrikaner was to restore what had been lost through their hard work, perseverance, and specifically a collective and not individual effort. Finally, the Afrikaner identity was deeply informed by a historical memory of independence and resistance, stretching from the Great Track to pivotal conflicts such as the Battle of Blood River and the Battle of Majuba. These events were not merely historical markers for these people, but formative narratives that reinforced a commitment to self-rule and self-determination, and also a suspicion of any external domination. 20th century socialist systems, by contrast, were typically associated with highly centralized authoritarian structures, and the philosophy of Karl Marx was fundamentally opposed to any form of ethnic self-governance from a Christian nationalist perspective. For a nation such as the Afrikaner, whose identity had been forged in opposition to the empire and to external control, the idea of submitting to an authoritarian communist system, particularly one tied to internationalists such as Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin or globalist ideological movements, was simply never even an option that was considered. As an oppressed minority, today's generation of Afrikaners stand at a crossroad just like our ancestors did after the devastation of the Boer War. And once again, we have opted to build, to construct and uplift our people through our collective effort rather than any revolutionary action seeking to use the state as the mechanism for change. We have firmly resolved to fight for private property rights and the freedom to engage in economic activities without constant government interference, and in many regards, this is already bearing fruit as many of our people continue to excel despite the government's active discrimination against not only our people, but all minorities to certain extents. And this is perhaps the real lesson of today, that is May Day, this great communist holiday that our country celebrates because we are ruled by the ANC. That even in the midst of very real oppression and very real dispossession, a people such as the Afrikaner can rise without losing themselves in an abstract or artificial ideology based on the distorted notion of egalitarianism. And perhaps, by God's grace, this will end up being the lever catapulting the Afrikaner people to freedom in the future. In a recent video, we highlighted why many white South Africans continue to flourish in South Africa even after decades of discrimination through the government's black economic empowerment. Why the Afrikaner people are 20 times richer today than the other peoples of South Africa, despite the fact that they are the minority that is most discriminated against by this tyrannical government of the ANC. Check out that full analysis by clicking on this link appearing on your screen right now. And if you support us and our message and the content that we make to change the hearts and minds of people, invest in us by becoming a paying member to help us pay our people's salaries. Simply follow the easy steps on the banner. Goodbye and God bless.